B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, November 19th, 2018. It's Thanksgiving week. It'll be a short one. I'll bring you podcasts through Wednesday, again on Monday, and then I'm going to take the rest of next week off. Your humble host needs a little break. He's been breathing toxic air and covering toxic politics, and so we're going to take a little road trip and see if we can air things out. Over the weekend, a blunder by the Office of the Special Counsel, St. Bob Mueller, the guy who's had no leaks, made no blunders, no errors. Well, a colossal screw-up occurred. And in court filings in an unrelated matter, a sealed case that we don't have details on, the special counsel inadvertently revealed that there is, in fact, a sealed indictment of Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, who remains holed up in the Embassy of Ecuador in London. And many people said, what's he doing there? Come on, what's he afraid of? And Julian Assange has had the well-founded concern for years now that as far back as the Obama administration, there was such a secret indictment. And if he yielded to the efforts by Sweden to get him to return to testify in a completely unrelated case, yes, a salacious case that involves sex, many people thought Julian Assange is just plain paranoid. And so we know what many of us have long suspected, that there is a scheme to grab Julian Assange if they can penetrate the sovereignty of Ecuador's embassy or find some ruse to get him to leave. Pick him up, put him on a plane, maybe give him the Gitmo treatment, with the anal suppositories and the mask and earplugs, a little methloquone to make you feel crazy. So that scheme has been revealed. And what is fascinating, and I want to credit Moon of Alabama, Glenn Greenwald, and Caitlin Johnstone for their astute comments, that as we've seen the U.S. media do backflips over Jim Acosta's loss of his White House credential after that exchange with Trump at a press conference, that is seen as a First Amendment issue. And when I was away on Friday, I was surprised that a federal court, under a judge appointed by Donald Trump, ruled that the CNN organization and Acosta as a reporter had a First Amendment right to access to the White House. The judge issued an order. It's good for 14 days. We'll cover those details in a moment. Now, the real issue here of press freedom is not over whether a superstar reporter from CNN, who I think was badly treated by Trump, rudely, repeatedly interrupted as he tried to ask questions. I take Acosta's side in that little dust-up with Trump. But the real important First Amendment press issue relates to the Assange case. And will St. Bob Mueller indict him under the Espionage Act? Now, this is all very murky. First of all, Julian Assange is Australian. I don't know how the U.S. has jurisdiction over him, even if he lands somehow in the United States. And secondly, as Greenwald points out in the article that I've linked to in the show file for today's podcast, during the Obama years, they looked at every angle, hoping to find a way to arrest and prosecute Julian Assange. And they deduced that because of that pesky First Amendment, that if they roll up Assange, they would have to roll up the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian. Those are the outlets that publish the fruits of WikiLeaks' harvesting of documents. And I find it fascinating because in what amounts to a full page in the New York Times, it's two different stories. One is kind of a recap of Assange, and the other asks and answers frequently asked questions. There is no mention that the New York Times published disclosures from WikiLeaks. They have this curious detachment. that Assange is not their reporter. And yes, they gained circulation, they gained credibility from publishing documents that came from WikiLeaks. But I haven't seen any editorials so far in any mainstream newspaper demanding justice for Assange and demanding some sort of justification for the presumed incursion on the First Amendment rights that would occur from a prosecution of Assange. And so Greenwald compares the Trump Department of Justice under Sessions and the Obama Department of Justice. And he notes that many Democrats are siding with the Trump Department of Justice because they want vindication. They believe that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange denied Hillary Clinton her due. And so it's payback time. And the First Amendment, the standards for disclosures of secret documents, many of which shouldn't be secret, those go out the window in this emotional and politically manipulated reaction to what is a serious threat to our freedom of the press. Greenwald writes, it is this utterly craven and authoritarian mentality that is about to put Democrats of all sorts in bed with the most extremist and dangerous of the Trump faction as they unite to create precedents under which the publication of information, long held sacrosanct by anyone caring about press freedoms, can now be legally punished. He notes the lawsuit by the Democratic National Committee against WikiLeaks, which presumes that all of the intelligence findings are fact. And so far, we don't have any evidence to support those. The critical link is we have never seen evidence that shows that Russians hacked material and delivered it to WikiLeaks. And as Bill Binney and Ray McGovern and many others have pointed out, the NSA has that information if it exists. So I encourage you to read Greenwald's piece, and likewise, Caitlin Johnstone nails it. She starts with a tweet from Neera Tanden. Neera runs the Center for American Progress, the Democratic think tank that, of course, was the government in exile for the Clintons. And the tweet from Neera Tanden reads simply, "Never mess with karma," and links to the Wall Street Journal report of the Justice Department charging Julian Assange. And I encourage you to read Johnstone's piece. She says, a Democratic pundit using the concept of karma to justify enthusiastic support for Trump's fascistic attack on press freedoms is exactly the same as a Republican pundit using God wills it to justify the existence of poverty. And she says there's really no other way you can justify supporting a Trump administration agenda, one that you claim to oppose, in a prosecution with legal implications that are severely detrimental to the free press which you claim to support. The only way to justify it is with some vague abstract notion that Assange is just getting what he deserves. And of course, this is tainted by the pro-Hillary Clinton factions who don't want to believe any of the legitimate documents that were released and what they mean, whether it was her Wall Street speeches, the memos with Podesta, the memos from Doug Band promising $60 million in revenue to Bill Clinton if Hillary gets elected. No, we're not allowed to look at that or believe any of it because, well, Russia. And that is so intellectually insulting. So I encourage you to read both of these commentaries. I think they make important points about the critical nature of this attack on our free press. And I mentioned Jim Acosta and the judge's ruling for 14 days on Friday. Well, the White House saw that it's only a 2-week order, and they sent a letter to CNN saying that they're going to yank Jim Acosta's credentials again when that 14-day order expires. And we'll see how this tit-for-tat plays out. Meanwhile, over the weekend, a lot of things were resolved. Now, I'm not saying that the votes were counted and that we have honest outcomes to these elections. But Senator Milquetoast, Bill Nelson of Florida, conceded on Sunday that he'd lost his re-election bid to Republican Governor Rick Scott. Scott won the Senate race by about 10,000 votes out of more than 8 million cast. There was a machine recount and then a hand recount. And fundamentally, the hand recount showed that in Broward County, that badly produced ballot, where they put the Senate race in the bottom on the left side underneath all the ballot instructions, well, when they got to that hand recount, it was clear that people just skipped the Senate race. Perhaps not intentionally, but that is what occurred. Also, Andrew Gillum, who didn't have much of a chance of recovering 60,000 votes in the recount process. He is the African-American Democrat mayor of Tallahassee, and he conceded, once again, to the racist Republican Ron DeSantis. And it's really tragic to see Florida choose a Trump loyalist who used racist dog whistles to gain advantage in this race. So the only Senate race that is undecided is in Mississippi, and we're told there will be a runoff there, so we won't know that for a few more weeks. Meanwhile, that Broward County scene, we know that there was a contest by the guy who lost to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Is his name Kavanaugh? Tim Canova, that's his name. And he accused Brenda Snipes of failing to save the ballot images in the electronic voting machines. And Brenda Snipes was in the crossfires of snipers from all sides in the contest here in the last 2 weeks in Broward County. So over the weekend, at the age of 75, she's decided she's had enough, and she resigned. Now to the Peach State in Georgia, where Brian Kemp, the Secretary of State, ran for the governor's office. And along the way, he purged over 300,000 voters. He blocked the registration of as many as 50,000 people, likely African Americans, who wanted to vote in this election. And Stacey Abrams issued a statement that is not a concession. Quote, "I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor. But to watch an elected official who claims to represent the people in this state baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been truly appalling." So let's be clear. This is not a speech of concession, because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. As a woman of conscience and faith, I cannot concede that. But my assessment is the law currently allows no further viable remedy. They can complain that I should not use this moment to recap what was done wrong or to demand a remedy. You see, as a leader, I should be stoic in my outrage and silent in my rebuke. But stoicism is a luxury, and silence is a weapon for those who would quiet the voices of the people. And I will not concede, because the erosion of our democracy is not right. And so this is election fraud. Let me be really blunt. Georgia, Florida, egregious election fraud. Texas, where Beto O'Rourke should have won. Significant voter fraud, all based on the suppression tactics, the purges of the voter rolls, the interstate cross-check list, and the 8 states, including Georgia, that have a line on their voter registration form where you check off your race, enabling them to say, oh, we don't need to process this registration. And Greg Palast wrote a heartfelt post from Atlanta, and he vows to fight on. Now, he says, as a journalist and not a campaign operative, he can only offer reports and his affidavit to support Stacey Abrams. But now that she's no longer in the race, he says we are free to open our files to her new voting rights group, Fair Fight Georgia. And the immediate weapon will be litigation against the state of Georgia to show that the election was hopelessly tainted and under Georgia law could result in a court throwing out the whole rotting dung heap of an election. This is why Abrams technically did not concede but dropped her claim to office. So I'm planning to catch up with Greg Palast in the near future, and we'll get a full recap of what happened in Georgia. Now, the New York Times, in a front pager on Sunday, the headline gave me whiplash because an election grid rife with flaws shows them all. reads the top headline, and the subheadline says, "No signs of vast fraud, but glitches and flubs sow skepticism." Now, if you know how social media works, this article will be posted by people who will only read those headline elements. And when you look at the article, which fills a full page inside the news section, they note the purging of eligible voters in 13 states, the 16 states that have a photo ID, the many states that use electronic voting machines with no paper trail. And yet, they can't bring themselves to call that election fraud. Who, What, Why gets it right. They're calling to provide punishment for election officials for security and privacy violations. I've linked to their piece, and that link is in the show file at peterbcollins.com. Every day I pause to thank people who support my work with your subscriptions to the Peter B. Collins podcast. People like Stuart Russell, Ethan Knox, Paul Tomaselli, and Andrew Rush. I invite you to join them. That's how this whole thing works. We keep it going with your contributions. So come on over to peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, then click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page, and it's easy. You can take it from there. $5, $10, $20 a month. The $50 annual subscription earns you the bonus gift. That's John Dist's new rock and roll CD called American University. And if you want to correspond by the U.S. mail, my address is Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Now, I want to acknowledge I was off Friday to attend David Schwartz's funeral, and I'm going to take some time off for Thanksgiving, and then I'm going to take a little time off next week. And I want to express my own disappointment to my subscribers that I've been a little slack on the in-depth interviews. Some of it is people who didn't respond to my interview requests over the past week or so. In any case, I do want to recommend an interview, a video interview, that is now posted at consortiumnews.com. And it is the companion video to a powerful written investigative report by my colleague Peter Byrne from here in California. And it exposes a scheme that is really astounding. Former Senator Barbara Boxer passed the legislation that enabled a largely dissolved Native American tribe called the Graytons to reestablish and to form a rancheria. A rancheria lets you own a casino. And Barbara Boxer's son, Doug, teamed up with a very influential political operative in California named Darius Anderson. They got an exclusive deal with the Grayton Indians to help them find the real estate and build that casino. And then they proceeded to try to fleece this Native American tribe. They submitted, requests for proposals to casino operators from Las Vegas on terms that were grossly favorable to Boxer and Anderson, with almost nothing for the tribe. And after a lengthy arbitration, the arbitrators clearly found that Boxer and Anderson had pursued a fraudulent scheme against this Native American tribe. It's quite a blockbuster story, and it's been blacked out here on the West Coast because Darius Anderson owns a newspaper, the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat, and he's influential at keeping it out of other media outlets as well. So kudos to Peter Byrne, and also our thanks to Joe Laria at Consortium News for publishing this. And if you access the article, I've linked to it in the show file here at peterbcollins.com. Scroll down, and you will find the embedded video, which runs just under half an hour. Well, I'm surprised to report to you that in Orange County, behind the orange curtain, Democrats swept the Republicans out of power. I remember just 20 years ago, B1 Bob Dornan was holding forth, seemed invincible. But this time, the Democrats put heavy emphasis on Orange County, and Gil Cisneros is the final one to declare victory over a woman named Young Kim, who conceded over the weekend. And this sets up the battle for the speakership. There are now 16 House Democrats who went public today saying they will vote to deny Nancy Pelosi another stint as House Speaker. Now, there'll be an internal caucus election after Thanksgiving, and then the January 3rd floor vote. And I'm very confident that Nancy Pelosi will prevail. and she will return to the speakership. I personally don't think it's the best route forward. And I see all the Democrats closing ranks, and they're saying, well, it's sexist if you oppose Pelosi, even if you support another woman to replace her. And it's racist if you want to shake up the leadership and kick out James Clyburn, 78 years old, who certainly is a good man but past his prime. And voters do want to see a shake-up in that leadership. But Pelosi has the votes, I believe, and this effort may cause her to shuffle the ranks of the leadership just below her. But she's also got a lot of juice to feed to people and threats to leverage if people don't follow her way. So California has survived a visit from the dear tweeter as we struggle to deal with these tragic wildfires. Death count is now over 80. There are hundreds of people still missing. That list fluctuates up and down. Last I saw was 900 people who so far cannot be located. And Trump went to the fire zone in Paradise, which he twice referred to as pleasure, and had to be corrected by Governor Brown and the mutterings of other people in the press gaggle that he was addressing. He also proved his buffoonery by claiming that if Californians would pick up a rake and rake these forests, that we wouldn't have this problem. And he cited the president of Finland telling him about their forest management practices, and the president of Finland says, well, we did talk about it, but Trump didn't actually get what I told him. And so yesterday, despite the president's suggestion, I was actually out raking leaves, but not at his behest. And Media Matters did a study that shows that national TV coverage of the California wildfires has almost eliminated any references to climate change. ABC, CBS, and NBC cover the fires in great detail, but when you actually break it down, CBS in 34 stories mentioned climate change once, ABC 36 stories, climate change once, NBC 37 stories, climate change was mentioned twice, both times by Al Roker on the Today Show. And so Trump is having his way, and the corporate media is taking his cues on that. And Trump, of course, despite the issues of climate change, is pressing forward to name the former coal industry lobbyist, Andrew Wheeler, to be the permanent head of the EPA. Isn't that swell? And will Congress put up a fight? Well, the new Senate will rush to confirm him with as few questions as possible. Mark Zuckerberg is under fire from almost every direction. There were two very critical reports, one in the New York Times last week, showing that Facebook had hired a disinformation company to attack its perceived enemies, one of whom was George Soros, the Holocaust survivor. And there were false reports, fake news, promoted by a Facebook subcontractor, attacking George Soros as an enemy of Facebook. And at the same time, Zuckerberg cuddled up with the Anti-Defamation League to fend off attacks on him as anti-Semitic. Now, is that rank hypocrisy? I think you just answered my question for me. Now, Zuck held a team meeting in Menlo Park at Facebook HQ on Friday. He said the idea that Facebook tried to cover up anything was dead wrong. And he said much of the criticism of his company over the past 18 months has been fair and important. Really. And Margaret Sullivan, the former public editor of the New York Times, now a media columnist for the Washington Post, is calling on Zuck to give up his chairmanship at Facebook. And she cites the recent reporting, also an article I haven't seen from her own newspaper. It says, focused on a particular blogger who makes a living inventing viral lies that spread and are believed on Facebook. And she basically says, joining investors, that Zuckerberg should give up the chairmanship and just focus on being the CEO. But as I've mentioned, he owns 60% of the company, has all the voting stock, and that is not about to happen anytime soon. I'm glad to see that it only took 2 weeks for 3 Democratic U.S. senators to file a lawsuit challenging the legitimacy of Trump's interim appointment of Matthew Whitaker as Attorney General. And I agree with the basis of their lawsuit. I'm glad they've done it. But why did they wait? This should have been the morning after the appointment was made. And so we see that the Supreme Court has been asked in one of these lawsuits about whether Trump did legitimately appoint Mr. Whitaker instead of the Deputy Attorney General who has been treated to Senate confirmation. Here in San Francisco, attorneys for immigrant advocacy groups are asking a federal judge to block the Trump administration's latest edict to automatically deny asylum protections to migrants who illegally cross the border. You need to come in at a crossing point, and of course they're not allowing you to apply for asylum. They tell you they're too busy, come back later, we don't have enough forms. I mean, they're doing everything they can to block this, and it is not legal, in my opinion. I think that the courts will strike this down. And I want to thank our friends at the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York. They have filed a similar suit on the East Coast, as I received a press alert from them earlier today. And this all occurs at a time when we've got almost 6,000 Marines who are unrolling barbed wire along the border. And those lucky devils get to spend Thanksgiving there? That is so atrocious. It really is. And in Tijuana, it appears that Trump's vilifying of the caravan is having some impact, because the mayor of Tijuana has referred to the migrants as bums, a horde. A small group of residents held a protest on Sunday, shouting no to the invasion. They are terrorists. They get Fox News in Tijuana. And finally today, our dear tweeter decided to insult Adam Schiff. He's the incoming chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, wants to revive the Russia probe. And I have my issues with Adam Schiff, but Trump decided to kind of merge insults and gross language. Funny to see little Adam Schitt, spelled S-C-H-I-T-T, talking about the fact that acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker was not approved by the Senate, but not mentioning the fact that Bob Mueller, who is highly conflicted, was not approved by the Senate. Now, Trump, this is his infamous willful ignorance at work again. It surfaces about 24 times a day, and you don't have to get Senate approval for a special counsel. He could have easily said Jared Kushner wasn't confirmed either, because whatever job he has in the White House doesn't require Senate confirmation. But, hey, we can't let facts get in the way, can we? Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it all over the damn place. You'll find it on YouTube, and I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling